Hi and welcome. My name's Jeff Andrews with Business of Child Care, welcoming you to another session of our summer series. We've got a great topic today that we're going to be joined by Sally Rutledge-Ott. I'll introduce her in just a second. Throughout our time today, for those joining the live session, I encourage you to drop questions meant to be a conversation, just as other events in our series, bringing real-time topics to the surface and engaging with leaders. And you'll hear in a minute, Sally's really a leader in the field of nonprofit governance and provides a whole lot of things. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Before we get started, it seems appropriate that I give you a quick introduction to Business of Child Care. We're based out of Minnesota, and we're focused on helping guide child care business owners in the communities they serve to better outcomes. And you can see a lot of very impactful outcomes, especially for many of the communities that we work with across the landscape of America. Our services stretch currently out into Western North Carolina. We're in South Dakota and several other states, helping advise and really guide communities to ways that they can find better outcomes than what they've found so far. And philosophically, foundationally, wage realization opportunity is a great outcome when we have child care systems that work, right? We know that often child care is not only great for the child and all the things happening there, but it's great for the family. Somebody often has a chance to pursue work or other opportunities that continue helping them pursue their own dreams and goals, which is what make our communities rich. And when we think about this, we think about it from the perspective of the whole community. Our work is rooted in the idea that we all benefit from great childcare opportunities that meet all of the needs of our community as families, certainly, but also from a functional perspective. When employers have folks that have quality childcare that they feel good about, they're more productive and more often consistent in the work that they're doing. Even in our education realms, our elementary school principals and kindergarten teachers often can understand when a child has had the opportunity to be in play appropriate, age appropriate care settings in their earliest years. So how we do that at Business of Child Care is really meet communities where they're at. And we really frame it up as 3 stages of readiness. Many communities still figuring out what's the real impact to our community. What is maybe our not so efficient child care breaking down in other ways. Communities who have realized that they have an impact and want to take action, we help guide them through a short process to create a child care solution activation plan. We need to know our address for success prior to get going. We do a great job in helping communities figure out and define what in the moment is important for them to move forward, and then give them the recipe to make it happen. And more, and really as part of the series today, really helping activate plans. And that covers a full spectrum from creating new capacity to supporting our existing providers. And that's a big part of today's conversation, child care centers and the opportunities they have. We'll talk about that here in just a second. Our 2024 success story, right from Sally's home state in Illinois, Moultrie County. Great outcomes going through that full cycle of stages, right? Understanding impact, we help them build a plan in less than 2 years. Great outcomes for that local community and for the families that live there and call it home. And as we get started, I always like to take a moment to help all of those joining us, again, live or in post-session. This is about infrastructure, right? When we think about our communities, we think about their vitality. We often go to the basics, right? We need roads, and we need roads that are kept up. We need utilities to get power to those new housing developments that we're putting in. Even water towers and broadband all come with an investment by communities. And we think about that oftentimes as a necessity. And now more and more communities are thinking about childcare as an infrastructure opportunity, just like roads, just like power lines, and just like the water towers that we have at home. So it's a really good opportunity to think about how can the community play a more active role when it comes to childcare. In my most recent article, I just highlighted work on myself and our childcare business advisors are doing out in the field in real time, working with childcare centers that frankly are struggling, that are in deep crisis and looking for a way forward. And through our child care center stability and growth program, we help programs, number one, figure out the math, but also figure out better ways to move forward. And one of the topics that certainly is very evident out there is the breakdown between the nonprofit kind of structure and well-meaning group of folks and the on-the-ground operators, directors who are spinning in a circle on a regular basis because there is maybe no direction. Maybe there isn't a plan, or oftentimes cross signals, right? One side saying this, one side saying this, and that again contributes to the breakdowns just functionally for our child care centers. Why? Because oftentimes those that we've asked to lead the operation leave the operation because at some point the chaos is too much to maintain. So today we're I can say really excited. I can say I'm thrilled. Sally Rutledge-Ott is somebody that's known again around the country helping nonprofits figure better ways forward. And she probably says it more elegantly than I do, but her work with business and child care, my relationship with her goes way back to really about again solving problems. Right. And oftentimes, as Sally and I have talked, it comes down simply to understanding where the challenges or the breakdowns are and acting right to get to a place where things are better. And so she works with communities who want to create that infrastructure to help support childcare in an enduring way. Crawford County, Illinois, Crawford County Kids Association, an outcome that Sally helped the local team build to really create more of a community infrastructure. And so our whole conversation today will maybe focus on child care centers and some of the breakdowns that we're seeing there really can apply broadly. And as Sally will share, I'm sure there's many opportunities, no matter what nonprofit you're in, to make sure you're doing it the right way, because doing it the right way builds confidence, and building confidence allows people who come into these roles to act confidently. And so I'm excited to have her conversation as we get going. Sally, welcome.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We've got a really big topic today, and I want to set the stage a little bit first to kind of give the audience an idea of maybe what we're running into, right? And this is that idea of the breakdown, and what does that breakdown look like? And so as we take a moment here, we think about how we frame this challenge, and it's really an obvious one. It's one that we see over and over again, is that from afar, unless you're dropping your kids off or you're otherwise somewhat connected to a child care center, often those centers exist and operate just like every other business does, right? In their space, doing their things. And often we think because of the headlines of demand for childcare that any center we see must be doing well, right? Strong enrollment, community and community trust in place. We just see it. But in reality, oftentimes behind the scenes, outside of some of the operational and business challenges, we're seeing just a breakdown in the infrastructure to help support that entity, right? And that's something we're going to talk a little bit about today. You see there, this is actually one of my examples, full wait list, committed team, but there wasn't really anything running the ship, right? It was a structure issue, and it was something that we see over and over. When you think about Sally being brought in to support a struggling nonprofit, maybe it's been a center in the past, maybe broadly a nonprofit organization, what generally is your first sign that maybe governance is not as well as it could be, or maybe even as a root cause of maybe some of the other challenges that organization is seeing?
Well, there's a couple different ways. I think the first thing is if I get that call or I get that email, I ask a lot of questions. I really want to get to the root of what their issues are. And nine times out of 10, I can tell right away. So I'm either talking to the, president and CEO or executive director, or I'm talking to the chair or president of the board. So what I ask them to do is to send me all their legal policies and procedures. Let me see what's going on. And many of them say, well, we don't have those. Or we're working with outdated bylaws. So right now you're in violation of all your compliance. Right. What doing it the wrong way is harder. Doing it the right way is easier. And yeah, you need this stuff because it keeps everybody open to understanding the legalities behind a nonprofit, childcare or otherwise. Now, Jeff and I have worked on, several different things together, and Crawford County is such a success. It's not just because of what Jeff and I did. It's because the leadership was set up correctly the first time. We did the board training with them before they ever got started. I knew there was going to be issues with outside people trying to understand what this county was doing. But a strong leader like Risa Shaner understood she needed to take it all in, and she needed to make sure the board ran correctly. So sometimes boards will hire me to just sit in a board meeting via Zoom, and I can pretty much, after about 2 minutes, I have to pull out the stop, right? I say, you're hurting me. And that's so simple to see, but it's hard to see if you're in the middle of it,
Well,
right?
especially in our centers that are in crisis and are trying
Yeah.
to get enrollment up or trying to keep the doors open. Oftentimes, some of the things that when the ship is sailing in calm waters are easy to account for, sometimes move to the bottom of the list, right? And I think you started to go down this path when we start to think about just the lack of that structure.
Yes.
We see that in our work oftentimes when we're working with centers early on, similar intake process. Hey, do you have a sales and marketing plan? Do you have a staffing kind of philosophy defined? Do you have anything that's written down that somebody can look to
Mhm.
as what we're measuring, right? That whole idea of the baseline, I see that come out in a lot of your work is you got to have some kind of baseline, and that's where you're seeing a lot of breakdowns of the baseline may have started somewhere, but somewhere along the way it fell away. Does that seem true to what you're seeing in real time?
It really is. What started can morph itself so quickly. And I like to call that mission creep because, in your set of bylaws, which is the governing document for your organization or even corporate structure, uh, I say, well, how true to your mission are you? Your mission statement. Oh, well, we don't pay a lot of attention to that. I go, okay, that's part of your problem.
Right.
Because when you're struggling, right? You want to try anything. We'll throw anything against the wall. What's going to stick today and what's going to stick tomorrow? And all of a sudden, your board doesn't know what's going on and your team doesn't really understand. And your mission creeps so strongly away from what you're supposed to be doing that you've forgotten what you're supposed to do. Structure with a nonprofit without structure, you may as well close your doors because it's going to eventually happen. And that makes me sad.
Well, it's sometimes the misnomer in the kind of everyday travels nonprofit, we don't necessarily then attach the word business. And it doesn't mean a nonprofit is a business, but I think
It
what you're
is.
highlighting is the basic structure of organization of a business or of any organization is ultimately what somewhat defines their success as they move forward, not just in reaching their mission, right? But to be able to report on it, to be appropriately filed with whatever agencies, and more importantly on anything is have consistency over time,
Yeah.
true to that mission.
Well, it's absolutely true. And, it's a nonprofit is a business. The nonprofit is just the charter part of it, and it establishes that line of your business. But you have to run your nonprofit like a business. And, there's no hospital that is going to let, you know, the structure fall apart because when the structure falls apart, even with a hospital system, with a bank system, I mean, it can tumble quickly, right? I mean, life's a pyramid chart. You need to structure it accordingly, right? Whether it's if you start to invert that chart, you're going to have a lot of problems. So I try to remind people that you can gain sustainability for your organization through the proper structuring from the top to the bottom. And everybody is important at every level. But if you run your nonprofit with volunteers that are untrained, shame on you because you're going to have problems. And that's an easy fix. just go through some training, go through some development. Let's get a strategy of what this is going to be. Let's look at the governing documents together. Let me explain why it's important. And so I love working with Jeff and Tricia and his team about starting that new nonprofit, whether it's childcare or other, because I know we're going to structure them correctly to get started for success. And, I will ad nauseum go over what the structure is until it clicks. And you can see it actually click in people. And that, I think, what excites Jeff and I more than anything is, oh, they're getting it. Look at that. Bonus win.
But it's breaking it down, right? And I think that the last question comment that we talked about is we were planning on coming together today was this idea that the other breakdown before we move into the better way forward, the other breakdown we see consistency is a lack of definition of even what the role of the board is. An individual member, not even just the board, but if you're on the board, sometimes in childcare centers, we hear often that sometimes the challenge is the only one willing to raise their hand to be on the board were parents.
Right,
And they're
right.
great people, don't get me wrong, but they're coming to it from a lens of also the consumer of said business. And so I think you've highlighted, and we use these fancy words, fiduciary responsibility, and that sometimes in the formal sense naturally lives its maybe perceived importance, but even more simply is we have to be stewards of whatever it is we're the board of. And we can't put our own
Yeah.
things in front of that ultimate goal of over time, you and I won't be on that board, right? Well, how do we make sure 10 years from now we're still true to our mission? Do you see that as a continuing challenge too?
I do. I do. And there's a little bit of conflict of interest arising with that. So having that strong conflict of interest statement in place and understanding what it is, reporting what your conflict, perceived or otherwise, could be, is very important for the rest of the board to understand. You need to understand when you can vote and when you cannot vote based upon that conflict of interest statement. Confidentiality is also a problem right now, Jeff. When people are like to blah, 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 blah about what's going on inside of the boardroom. You're not going to find that at a corporate. And if you do, you're going to be fired for it, right? Everybody signs a confidentiality agreement because it's confidential and it's proprietary to your organization. Listen, when you set up your nonprofit, the state knows that you're in, that you are. The attorney general knows that you are. The Department of Revenue for your state knows who you are, and the IRS knows who you are because you're legally and financially responsible for that organization when you sit on the board. Did you know that? Did you know that sitting on a board without directors and officers insurance can risk your personal items, house, cars, boats, pensions? So there's things to do to get people prepared. Jeff will get you started understanding the childcare needs. I come in after that and make sure you're set up correctly and trained correctly in order to follow through. It's such a brilliant plan.
Well, it makes a difference, right? Because as we shift and start to think about and share what better looks like, right? These are those elements and those patterns, right? And we've talked about all of them,
Oh, yes.
and they're real, and they're not bad, and they're not nefarious. They're not often anything other than everybody doing the best they can. But that real world impact that we highlight down there, right,
Mhm.
is over time we break down the system even little that we might have had,
Well,
right?
it's very true. I mean, because when board members sit on a board that don't have that proper training, not understanding what their legal and financial responsibilities are, whether it's based out of Sarbanes-Oxley or other, you can see the breakdown starting because the board members will just sit. They're not raising their hands. Well, I'm new, so I really don't have anything to say. Yeah, you do. We want to prepare you to be able to raise your hand with the proper question, vote appropriately based upon your bylaws and your mission. And without that, there's no way you can sustain your nonprofit. I mean, you can be, all roses for the first year, but then you're going to start seeing that because clear definition. defining those roles in a clear and defining way makes you strong stewards for your organization, not nitpicks. And so I hear, well, they like to nitpick. And I said, God, you need one of those nitpickers every now and then sitting there going, wait a minute, that's not what our mission says. Wait a minute, are we voting to move our organization forward? Or are we voting because our personal agenda says we have to?
Right.
Personal agendas have no place at the board. And I can usually spot them without hesitation.
Well, and a natural, and I talk with a lot of boards, our team does that are going through this process, and it's a naturally emotional topic.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
why it's even sometimes I think challenged on the traditional business things, just not childcare, just because but it's children.
It's
And
true.
I think that it's one of those pieces that when I do our kickoff session, our team does, sometimes that's the first time the board and the director have all sat in the same room. That's
Yeah,
the
that,
first
that
time anybody, we'll go through some of these, what about this? And people are like, what do you mean? What's our social media? And so I think as we move into kind of the idea of what better looks like, our foundational practice is have an address for success. Meaning you can't just wander around and hope it's going to work out. You can't get in the car and drive to where you've never been often today without the assistance of maps or Waze or whatever it might be. And that foundational thing I say to boards is give people direction on what you want them to do, because we've also sat in board meetings where there's really a loose agenda. It's kind of a, hey, this every month, there's not a standard report from the operator saying, here's our key performance indicators. And even if there is, I've often said, again, when we take down the defense barriers of what do you know or don't you know, I say, does anybody know what this even, like, what is this saying? And sometimes we have the deer in the headlights because no one, to your point, when they onboarded the board member, ever said, here's our basic meeting flow, and here's how we look at things, and here's what you get ahead of time. So again, even our logistics of running our board can be impactful on our ability when that limited time to come together matters. We're not just getting the chance to read the profit and loss. We're not just getting a chance to read that narrative. So I think those are things that as we start to shift our ideas and our thoughts to the next realm of, okay, we figured out maybe a challenge and a problem and some of the things that contribute to that. I think one of the questions I wanted to start about as we start thinking about what better looks like is how can boards strike a balance between community closeness, meaning oftentimes it's kind of the people that are really close to the child care center that end up being recruited or raise their hand or voluntold, as somebody says sometimes, and that strategic distance. You started to touch on it, the emotional, the personal agendas, but how do boards that you're seeing successful at a high level, what is their punchline recipe for helping make sure that we're being real and authentic to ourselves, but we're also as stewards of this thing, being true to the strategy and the hard decisions that sometimes even come as boards.
it's all about messaging. It's absolutely all about messaging and understanding who the messenger is. You can't have a board of 15 people all out there saying different things. The community is going to go, they don't know what they're talking about. Why would you send your child here? They don't know what they're talking about. Bill says one thing and Susan says something completely different. Messaging is really important, but it has to be controlled and it has to be prepared for good news or not so good news.
Yeah.
So, and social media can play such a positive or negative role for your organization. So the messaging starts at the board level. And the board decides who that messenger is going to be. There should be two. It should be the president and CEO or executive director, the top paid position, or in lieu of the president or chair of the board. Discussion can be held about what that messaging is going to be, but then that message has to be gone out. Now, can boards continue to share that message? Yeah, keep sharing it, keep talking about it, but know what you're talking about before you get out there.
Right.
Because, I hear things from board members, right? So if I'm working with an organization and it starts at the executive director level, so I hear and then I want to talk to the chair or president of the board. Well, then all of a sudden I got other board members emailing me. Well, they're not telling you what's really going on. And I've got blah, blah, blah. And I know. And pretty soon I'm like, oh, we're going to do this today. Right? And it happens all the time because boards feel like they can, open up to me because I'm not going to tell the other board members that I've had this kind of conversation because confidentiality is key to Jeff's business and my business. But I get into the giggle going because I'm just like, okay, well, Bill and Sue don't get along, and that's a personality thing. And you can kind of see it, even though they're like focused on, well, I'm only here to make it better for the dogs, the kids, the whatever. And I'm thinking, not really. So starting out with the messaging is really, really important and making it clear and precise and it's got to be positive. And if there's something that's not positive, you need to understand that there are ways to get that message out without creating fear and havoc in the community in which you're serving.
Yeah, one of the things you're highlighting, I think it's a good takeaway for the audience is that it starts with just having some structure. It
Oh,
starts
yeah.
with having some definition and
Yeah.
sometimes again, all these terms and all these things can be overwhelming. I always say, listen, just start with a sheet of paper and write down the basics.
Yeah.
Right? We've seen, I just talked with a center group out in Wisconsin here a month or so ago, and one of their big challenges was that their board was well-meaning people, but they didn't. There was no focus on who was on the board. They never onboarded anybody to say, hey, here's what we had. And matter of fact, 3 of the 4 new board members had not been to the actual child care center.
Mm,
And
mm,
so I think one of the things that you do is talk again in these foundational moments. You got everything filed, but now we have to create both formally and just as a way for us to understand, here's our basic process. When a new board member comes on, we do 2 sessions of orientation. We have a packet ahead of time that we send that has kind of what we've been doing and what's been happening. We schedule a tour and do meet and greets with people so that again we're connecting people sitting around the proverbial table also with some awareness, even if not at a depth of somebody who might be running the center, but enough depth when they did the tour where the director was to say, look at that, that's one of our capital maintenance issues. We got a leaking roof over here and it's a storage area, and half the time we've got to throw some things out. Well, if we never have those chance to tell those stories and show and tell or even build that awareness when we get to board meetings,
mhm.
we don't have a frame of reference that often is aligned correctly. So I think that's a big thing you do too, right? Is whether it's with your support or otherwise, get your basic ground rules defined early on, and then keep making sure everybody knows those for sure. Even though there's a long list, right? Make sure we're getting people at least to a place where they have some confidence to participate and be that contributor you need them to be.
The community knows. The community is, don't assume that the community's not hearing what's going on. Because if you have a rogue board member, the community's hearing about it. And maybe they're rogue for a couple of reasons. Maybe they don't want to be there, or their boss is making them be there, or they have a child there, so they think that everybody needs to know what's going on, or there's a lot of different reasons. But getting that structure correct with the board right at the get-go is important. Like I work with a nonprofit in Batavia, Illinois. Well, I work with a couple in Batavia because I love Batavia, Illinois. It's just a cool place.
Great town for
Right.
sure.
It's a great town, and there's really great people in that town. And I work with a couple different organizations. And every year they hire me to onboard their new board members. And I said, listen, you've done so much with me, you could do it yourself. Oh, no, 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 no. I want them to hear from somebody other than me so that I can say, well, remember what she said. Remember what Sally said. Remember what. So, I can come in and be your strong arm when it comes to that, or just have a nice conversation with them, let them understand. Because some of them really don't understand that, but they're great people and they want to do service because they have a servant's heart. Let's make sure that we give them the tools that are necessary. It's all called compliance in order to move that organization forward. And they're just so successful because of it. It makes me so happy to be a little tiny part of that.
Well, and one of the other things I think you stress very successfully as well is the second bullet here, the intentional recruitment, the
Oh, yes.
intentionality. Talk about a little bit from your perspective when you think about, I'm working with a few childcare center, communities are trying to build a childcare center and they're going to maybe, I said, well, how are you going to build your board? They're not ready to see you yet, by the way. I said, but how are you going to build your board? And I think one of the things you highlight maybe can expand on is it's not just about willing and able. It's also about, in some ways, functionality of representation. Sometimes it's representation from community, that whole community that we talked about that have not maybe permanent seats in the sense, but we always have a business community leader on. We always have somebody from the school district. We have somebody here because as a community asset, we want to make sure we're being intentional, not just about our delivery of those great services for children, but be intentional about making sure we're set up for success, even with the best process and the best documentation. It's a people thing. Talk a little bit about that, Sally, and how you help those maybe forming or filling spaces to think more intentionally about selection of folks.
Well, I remind them about diversity, equity, and inclusion for nonprofits. It's not political. It's allowing yourself the openness to get the right people at the right time for your board. And I always tell people, you know, Midge might be in a wheelchair, but Midge has a degree in psychology. Oh, that might be a good one to have. Or wait a minute, Bill has a cane because he had a stroke, but he has a master's degree in education. Oh, Bill's got a lifetime of knowledge that you might be able to tap. Now, are these board members or are they advisory council board members? That they don't have a vote, but boy, they bring what you need to that table when you need that at the table.
Right.
So I want you to expand your view and your purview about who's in your community. And the other thing I tell boards all the time too is, as a board member, it's your job to replace yourself. You need to replace yourself. That's part of your job. So you need to know who's out there. And it may be one of your friends, maybe it's not, maybe it's somebody else. They need to go through a board application process. They need to be interviewed by the board. There's things that have to be done before they get there because you want to make sure that they're sitting at the right time. So a nonprofit hired me a couple months ago to actually do those interviews with potential board members. And I found it fascinating because you and I like to do that because we like to talk to people. And at the end of it, I said, you really shouldn't be on any board ever, 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 ever. But I really want to be on the board. I said, your reasons are so outlandish that this nonprofit just can't invest itself in you right now. And I told the board, and they're like, oh, thank God, we thought that too. But, we thought it was just us. I go, oh, no, you don't ever want this, and because this person has the wrong indicators for sitting there. And once you start talking to people, you can pretty much gauge that. And if they fool us, well, it takes a lot to fool us anymore, right? I think it's because, I'm old. Er.
But you highlight, I think, this idea too that I was just working with a program in maybe southwestern Minnesota. It doesn't matter necessarily where, but they're in a rebuild state, right? The center again financially had some challenges.
Sure.
Was just not functioning, was lacking. Again, some of these just basics. Again, that's why I tell people start with the basics. You don't have to engineer the whole thing forever, but start by getting some of that structure. But as they went to rebuild, one of the things they realized with the limited resources they were working with is they had not only not a sales and marketing plan, this group, that wasn't their confidence place,
Mhm.
right? We had people who were really good at what they were doing, but when I started saying leads and conversion rates, it was, hey, that sounds exciting, but we don't know what that is. And so as we help them think about things more broadly, it leads us kind of to this idea of if you see yourself truly as a community asset, and I've never met a child care leader who doesn't, right? Because whether for profit, nonprofit, or anywhere in between, we're impacting kids and we're impacting as an indirect families and even at a bigger scope, the community.
Oh,
And
we're impacting our future.
wow, that too. But even in the moment, I said, what you really need help on is somebody to bring some thought leadership
Mhm.
to the table that
Yeah.
they don't they work in a whole they work in ag. They help market, the great machines that bring food to our tables.
Mhm.
I said, but they also sometimes, like a lot of people, love to have hobbies and even professional hobbies. And maybe by bringing them onto the board, again, to your point, making sure the indicators, doing a normal application, not just because I know you. So there's even some formality, even if they're the only one. Now
Mhm.
suddenly they have a role to play
Mhm.
that they have some confidence in that also is a value to your overarching strategy plans and thinking. They don't have to become the social media manager. They don't have to go run family tours, but they can give some of that structure that often is just it's again not because people don't want to, they don't even know.
Oh, they don't. They don't know what they don't know. And instead of saying, well, we don't need it, why don't you just say that you don't know to me or to Jeff? And you know what? That's okay. That's okay. I mean, you don't want me as your bookkeeper or your accountant. That's okay.
Right.
I'm the first one to say, oh, no, you don't want me to do that. Right. And if my accountant's listening, he's like, yeah, we don't want her to do that. But there's things that I'm great at. And on the application, I actually have in there what tricks you? What do you want to do? What are you great at? Spell it out. We want to make sure we get you on the right committee or subcommittee. We want to make sure that your time on the board is fruitful because these are our areas of concern and you fit right into area B, and so we want to make sure that you don't hire, a vet assistants to cut hair at a beauty parlor. You don't hire a golf pro to go and be a bowling instructor. We have to know what you're good at and try to make sure that we can fit you just like any other job.
Right. And maybe you're suggesting I don't need to hire a barber, and I don't. In that analogy, I think what we also think about is more and more that this is a community asset.
Yes.
And so I think there's a double win when
Mhm.
we're intentional about making sure our board is, as you said, representative of our community and in all lots of ways you could organize it. But by doing that, we're also connecting what's happening both great and maybe challenged in those four walls to a broader audience. Right? When the banker sits on there, they don't need to be in your business telling you don't run in your business right per se, but banks often have some community reinvestment funds that when you need the radon test, whether it's their bank or some other bank, that banker, Miss Johnson, she can make that happen. Right. And so it's also about we talk often to senators is you got to stop seeing yourself, no matter again, your legal org, as an invisible thing. Your community infrastructure, your community asset, and people are willing to help, but often when we drive by, we see some cars, we see a few kids out, we think it's great. So we also owe it to ourselves as boards and as operators of centers, as we're intentional about building our board and advisory and otherwise, to extend the net and to give people an opportunity where they can see themselves also being successful in the role of a board member. And that's what I hear from a lot of community members. I said I would, or they asked me, but I didn't know I didn't really know what they wanted me to do. And I didn't know when they didn't really have a schedule of meetings like set up where it's the first Tuesday of every month or whatever. So again, basics, foundations, things that help us do a better way often are right in front of us, right? And often things, as you mentioned earlier, that we apply to our everyday life. So we see that, right? When we start to find some definition, when we have an address for success, we start to see how things change, right? We're leading the discussion. We're not trying to get in and lead the day to day, right? We're shifting meetings from kind of absent, glazed over reviews of 14-page financials to here are the key things that we've been tracking. And ultimately, as we were just mentioning, those outside perspectives start to strengthen, right? Our funding, our policy opportunities. What I'm often struck by the simplicity, but often overlooked reality is this is a human thing.
Mhm.
And so we think about the operating cost that is the biggest burden on a child care center. It's the people in the classrooms.
Mhm.
We think about, boy, we got to have a strong director that that's been through the trenches, and trust me, they all have been, and then some. But we often stop there and we don't apply the same treatment to our board. And I think if we all start to come back to we're all humans, and amongst all the things happening in technology and such, this today still is a very human oriented, very human heavy interaction, and your board can really be a start to making sure that there's a mirroring and a collective spirit that extends that understanding from operations to leadership to the broader community.
Well, being a grandma like I am, I don't want my girls just going anywhere. I want to make sure that, they're getting the best child care, child rearing, child whatever. So I trust my son and daughter-in-law to make that happen. But believe me, when I walk into these places, I look a little differently than everybody else does. I see that, ooh, security seems a little loose here. Why was I able to just walk in? Okay, so go, talk to your police chief, have them come over, do a security check. Enlist your community to help you strengthen your own organization. They're not a threat to you. Should be part of the fiber of who you are. Right? So the strength comes from not only strong board members and strong leadership, but the community understanding we must preserve this because we helped build this. Who do keep in your circle these days? Where's your loyalty? Well, is it excuse me, Jeff, hairdresser? Is it my orthodontist? Because I'm on him about getting these things off. Is it my bank? I don't know. There's so many. Can I go somewhere else? Yeah. Childcare should be part of that ritual of making sure that it's set up correctly for not only the now, but for the future. And as funds are being stripped from nonprofits throughout the country right now, what's your fundraising arm look like? How strong is that? And maybe the fundraising people aren't sitting on your board, quagmired with all the other governments. Maybe that's a strong committee that the board sets up that has people on there that know what they're doing or are great at fundraising and having fun out in the community. But everything has to gear back to making sure your legal policies are in place, that the board structure is strong, that every committee person that sits there signs the same legal policies as everybody else. Why? Because they're representing you. I keep saying, well, do you have cash handling insurance? Well, no. I said, well, you're having a 50 raffle.
All
Yeah.
right.
I said, desperate people do desperate things. We want to ensure that they continue to work, but that we have some insurance in case that happens. They don't even think about that. Or that getting a dram shop license for a wine tasting may not be in your best interest.
All right.
Who can we partner with? Is it a local tavern? Is it a local liquor store? Yes, go to the liquor store. There's other ways to handle the structure. So the board needs to be rigid with their processes, strong with the people that are helping, but loose enough to let them help.
Right. Well, and again, you're highlighting, I think the big takeaway is all the elements of communication. It's
Right.
documentation. It's having an understanding of, as you mentioned earlier, the messaging that we're talking about. It's the communication even between the operator and the board. Right.
Yes.
And as the operator reporting to the chair, and then the chair disperses, which would normally might be the more appropriate way to do that. Or are we doing a free for all of the 8, 9 board members to the director who, oh, by the way, is also working 60 hours because they're short staffed because we don't really have a budget that's rooted in reality and based in math.
Or a budget at all.
Or a budget at all. Or I think that the biggest win too, from a communications perspective, is I've been working with several centers in different states right now that have closed in the last year, 2 years. When we suddenly are bringing more community leaders who, again, aren't into the realm of childcare, and everybody has understanding of what their understanding is, it is amazing to me, and I think it's similar to what you do with board members and new, is when we really start actually just breaking it down and walking through, well, here's the real math, right? Because everybody says, well, how can it be so expensive? It's not affordable, and yet you're paying teachers, $14 an hour and $11 an hour, you can't keep them in there. Well, we know the first issue is you can't keep people at $11 an hour. Right? It doesn't work, not especially if we think this is a community asset. I expect people in my community asset to be representative both of all things, including opportunity. I said, but when we got into this one particular community, suddenly the mayor, biggest advocate, wants it to work. It's like, there's no way this will work. Now, why? Because again, we gave some information, we broke it down in a way that was consumable for the audience. So that's the other piece of it, is that as we work with our boards, the communication understanding and even in that little application, what's your comfort or experience reading financial statements? Doesn't exclude them, but to your point, taking it a step further is now maybe I'm going to take that new board member and have them sit with our bookkeeper and I'm not going to have them drown them in the 42 lines of finance, but I'm going to start to, I have again, a structured orientation on the finance of our entity. These are what I think are your big takeaways I've been hearing, is start simple, but start with an understanding also of the importance, and distill it down in ways that as you bring people in, you ease them, but also don't leave out the important stuff that they need to do as duties of a board.
We also have to understand that board members can be fired and removed. And sometimes it needs to be. Bullying on the board is absolutely a deal breaker. Because if they bully once, they're going to bully twice. And you need to call them of that responsibility immediately. And so the boards need to take control of each other, and they need to check their own personalities and agendas when they come to that table. And we give them tools how to do that. We want it to be fun and engaging for them. We also want them to understand that keeping the confidences of the proprietary finances, budgeting, personnel is of high importance. And not everybody's cut out to be on the board. That's okay. Maybe they're better as a committee person. Maybe they're better as an advisor. Maybe they're great at fundraising or the social medias or the communications. Maybe that's where they're great at.
Right.
We need to start putting people in roles that they're great at or want to learn more about, instead of sticking somebody on the board just for a body.
Right.
We don't need the bodies anymore. We need strength, and sometimes it's in small numbers. Boards don't need to be massive, because honestly, any board past 12 people, they can't even decide on what pizza topping to have, right? Let alone a budget that needs to be structured properly. So every center, every nonprofit has different needs, wants, desires, and likes. And what Jeff and I do is try to find out what those are. What are those? What's the community saying about all this? What's the scuttlebutt going on? Sometimes it's just keeping your ear open a little bit, not responding to it, but making sure everybody, knows what's going on.
Right.
And you can, I mean, positive network marketing can be done through positive reinforcement of the message, right? So I have a degree in marketing. So messaging and communication is really big to me. Now, my degree is about 125 years old, but the same thing happens all the time, year after year after year. Positive marketing begets positive marketing back. And learning about bequeathing. I mean, more and more what I'm seeing is nonprofits are being left money from, and they don't know what to do with it. Like, well, what do we do with it? I'm like, what do you mean what you do with it? Your board has to make a decision. Do you not have a financial policy in place for this? Do you not have investing people that you can contact? No. And I'm like, okay, well, let's start there. Right now, stick it in the bank until we can figure out what to do with it.
Right. Well, and on that topic, we're seeing boards too, and this I think is the other piece, that having intentionality around the board also brings some new ideas. Some that we might all immediately go, well, that was a great idea, but let me tell you, the 14 other times it didn't work. But I
Yeah,
think what we're seeing when boards are struggling with the main crisis issue is the finance.
right.
Right? And we're struggling with that, never defined but always present affordability factor. And what I and our team helps programs think about, and again, this requires often board level thinking. That's why we have a board, is the operator trying to make sure all the fires are being put out and all the kids are having fun and eating. They don't always have the time to take that strategy, maybe what we might describe as executive level thinking, not because they're not capable,
Right.
but they got to be in a zone. We all know you got to be in a zone on that. And so it's also something where boards, especially that represent not just the families and kids in that program, but represent all sorts of walks of life, bring ideas from their own fields and go, why aren't we doing this? And case in point, to your point of, the gifts from donors and stuff. I've got a program right now. They're getting a decent size of money. What should we do? We're thinking about, basically giving everybody a discount or something. I said, well, that's fine. Because again, you get to make your own decisions. But I said, what if we were as a board thinking about this strategically? What if
Mhm.
we said, listen, part of our problem ongoing is that we have families who are struggling to make the tuition payment even when they have subsidy and everything else, and they've done their part to try to do that. They're still short $34 a week. And so week here, week we're gone because there's disruption and maybe hours available, right? The mom's getting cut early. I said, what if you took this money, part of it, and created internally a fund, which again, you have to define these things, you have to decide as a board, that was basically like a subsidy plus opportunity. And then I said, maybe take another section of that money and you create an emergency tuition fund that anybody who's a full week enrollment each year gets 2 weeks of emergency, kind of what we call health in the healthcare catastrophic coverage. You lost your job, well, at least for 2 weeks, we're going to cover you because Bobby then keeps going and probably in the stress of everything got a consistency. Plus, it allows you the freedom to get right back at what you're trying to do. And now it becomes a selling point on our sales and marketing side. And now we have something as a board when we go do our talks with people and raise some money, we have something to that for people to buy.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you can get sponsors and donors for that kind of stuff on a yearly basis. But what if you put a caveat on that? If we're going to subsidize Billy for $34 a week because we believe Billy deserves great care, just like you do, what if your part in the thank you to us is 10 hours a month work at the center?
All sorts of opportunities, right? But what you're pointing out, just
Let
this
them see.
dialogue,
Yeah, let them see it.
but this dialogue here is what boards aren't doing, right?
No.
They're not in a place where because they're not organized or because they're lacking some structure and some function on what they should be thinking about, this is the exact, and that's why I'm glad you played along with it, is now we can have a discussion. Because as
Yeah.
different board members now, you said one thing, I said one thing, but at the end of the day, we've got something to focus on that isn't whether the mop moved over here or is stored over there, because that's what we have our director to do, right? And I
Right.
think that's the biggest message that we can think about is bring yourself, and if you aren't a part of it, you want to be a part of it, you think you'd be a good match, reach out to the center and say, listen, I don't know anything about childcare. My kids are way gone past that, or maybe not, or maybe they're in it. But I don't know any, but I know this, and I'd like to be a part of that. And I think that's a big message, a big takeaway for those. In our final kind of moments here, I wanted to highlight the real deal, right? Getting real about it. And I think you've highlighted very well today all of these elements, right? It's ambiguity is what drives tension. It drives breakdowns in what we need as leading structure for all the other pieces. Because as we all know, anybody close to childcare, there isn't a lot of margin for error.
No.
And if we can, as a board, have clear decision charts, if we have board chairs that we're empowering to be a board chair and do their role, and ultimately, and you hit it at the beginning, not bringing our journey per se as the influence of decision, but rather a basis of experience and sharing, gives us a really good opportunity to think about and contribute. What would your advice be as we get close to wrapping up here for funders and community leaders? Who want to support stronger boards from the outside. Maybe they're a foundation who has some dollars, that they want to help get best impact for. What can some of those entities and others that are maybe outside of this realm, they're not the appropriate ones to be hands-on, but they want to support the efforts. What do you see as ways that they can contribute directly or indirectly to that continued learning and understanding and best practices?
Well, for a board, it really needs to be about that critical conversations sometimes that need to happen. It needs to be about that functionality of and sustainability for that center. You can't look just today's issues. You need to reach out a little bit. I like 6 months to a year and nothing really past that when it comes to the now hands-on stuff. Messaging is really, really important. We've got to keep that messaging positive. I read way too many negative things out there, and it starts to sour me, when I know it shouldn't be, but it does because, human behavior is a very interesting thing, right? And we all have things that we like and we don't like, and sometimes we talk about it, and sometimes we don't talk about it. So there's realities out there that every center and every nonprofit needs to be aware of, but I don't want them to get so stuck in the middle of the problem that they can't see past that problem. And
Right,
sometimes it takes somebody like you or me or some of my colleagues to say, okay, stop the madness right now. I'm hearing you, but I want to go and jump off, the bridge at this moment. I can't imagine what your team or your board is feeling. So
right.
let's calm it down. Let's just breathe. Let's get that first initial, interview done. Sit through a board meeting, find out what's going on. I mean, Jeff and I can pretty much tell within the first 15 minutes, oh, this is going to go really well. Or, oh my gosh, what time is it? I mean, if you've got a board that's always looking at the phone or looking at their watch, something's going on that's probably not where you want it to be. So we need to breathe. We need to breathe our way through this in order to continue to get it honest dialogue, critical conversations, not being offended. Let's stop being offended about everything. It's like you wake up, it's like, oh, what are people offended by today? Stop. Life is still going to go on. We can decide how that's going to happen. We can decide that our child care center is going to be the best one possible because we've got the strongest people that care sitting around this table or the best staff. And we need to understand, we need to support that team. Boards don't have day-to-day operational guidance. They need to stay out of it and deal with board governance. Understand.
The thank you card at the thank you card once a year, handwritten from board members to the folks running the staff. Easy win, by the way. No one ever gets a handwritten card to begin with, and certainly not often from the
Isn't
board.
it just like children? One, that a girl, that a boy, pumping them up a little bit and letting them continue. It's no different. I mean, thanking them.
Yeah, recognition, right? And that's a big part
Recognition.
of it. Doing the provider appreciation events as many communities do. I think the thing that we always fundamentally start with is let's get together and just figure out where we are. I
Yeah.
think before you take any action, before you embark on all sorts of plans and journeys and things, is set a time and an intentional time, not a 15-minute conversation at your next monthly meeting, but a true get together.
Yeah.
Sometimes boards do annual, it may call them retreat meetings. It doesn't have to be anything more formal than the local coffee shop in town coming together and saying, how is it, to your point, as a board, we are today? Having an honest, where are we breaking down and we don't get the report? Start there because even sometimes just coming together amongst yourselves is the first step, right? Because it gives even awareness for the new members that hadn't been there and the ones that forgot that, oh yeah, these are our core things that we're focused on. Here's our challenges or opportunities, not 20 of them, but here's the one thing this year is we're going to keep our enrollment up. Well, now everybody, every meeting, right? So starting with understanding where you're trying to go that's different today, foundational to the work that we do at Business of Childcare. I can't thank Sally enough for not only being here today and hopefully sharing some helpful things to start thinking about, but really being an asset for all of the community leaders, all of the passion leaders, all of the folks that are trying to do great things, have that organization. So it's one less thing that's on the worry list, and one more that's set up to help drive the overall success, which for childcare we know, and we don't ever lose sight of it, it's our children that get that benefit, it's the families that benefit, and it's the communities that we're in. Thanks again, Sally, for joining us. I encourage those, if you aren't familiar with Business of Childcare, visit our website, businessofchildcare.com. You probably at this point will have found us on YouTube. Within the description, a number of links, both to engage with Sally, connect with us. Even first, we'll connect you with Sally. We have a new guide out, how to spot a child care crisis, center in crisis in your community, a free resource. All of these things on our website. Follow us on LinkedIn. I can't tell you enough because what we're about is helping solve problems. And one challenge that I'm glad we got some more insights on today is the problem of just that kind of ineffective but well-intentioned governance that helps keep it all together. Thanks for joining us. Reach out if we can help. Sally, have a great day.
Thank you, Jeff. You too.